paper and a pencil. Excellent. Okay, thank you all for coming today. It's always a meeting that I personally look forward to. This is our September 2024 meeting of the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management. I'm your chair, Barbara Shing Todd. I'm joined by our co-chair, Lydia Brown. Alana is going to take minutes. Alana?
Hey, when I say your organization, please say your name. And remember, we only need one representative per organization. And if you haven't already, please make sure to write your name down over on our attendance sheet over there. It helps you with the minutes. And then for all of you online, please add your name and organization to the chat. All right. Audubon, Florida. Friends of the Hillsborough River.
Here.
Just say your name.
Compton.
Compton. Okay. Sierra Club.
Here, Nancy Stevens on my.
Tampa Bay Conservancy. Okay, Tampa Bay Waterkeeper. Tampa Bay Waterkeeper.
Justin Tramble.
Tampa Bay Watch.
Sarah Brem.
Great. Joe Island Clams. Black and Beach.
Kevin Shelton.
Gulfstream Natural Gas. Tampa Bay Pilots Association.
Here, Terry Fluke,
Thanks. Mosaic.
Keith Andesky,
Tampa Electric Company.
Nick Flecker.
UF IFAS and Florida Sea Grant. Okay, USF.
Steve Myers, alternate from Mark Luther.
Eckerd College.
Noel Bouquet.
Hillsborough County elected. Hillsborough County staff.
Good morning, David Glicksberg with Hillsborough County.
Thanks, David. Manatee County staff. Pasco County elected. Pasco County staff.
Melissa Charbonneau, Pasco County.
Pinellas County staff. Hernando County staff. Okay, how about Citrus County staff? Port Tampa Bay.
Chris Cooley, good morning.
Okay. Port of St. Petersburg. Seaport Manatee.
Good morning, Dan Fitzpatrick.
City of St. Pete.
Thanks.
Thanks, Joey. City of Tampa.
Other Montego, City of Tampa.
City of Clearwater. Our chair.
Here.
Okay, and our vice chair.
Woody Brown.
Thank you. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Rachel Case.
The Natural Resources Conservation Service. All right, NOAA.
Mark Schrammick, good morning.
Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Okay, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Anna Laws.
Anna, who are you joining us with?
FWC.
Oh, okay. Florida Department of Transportation. Southwest Florida Water Management District. Great. Hillsborough County at large.
Here.
And Pinellas County at large.
Here.
Oh. Our at large member is George. No. Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County.
Chris Pratt.
Chris, Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission.
Sean College.
Tampa Bay Estuary Program,
Ed Shirley.
US Fish and Wildlife Service, MacDill Air Force Base, Sarasota Bay Estuary Program,
Dave Mascot.
Tampa Bay Water.
Kathleen Jonas.
Right, and then we have Natasha is joining us on behalf of Pinellas. And then Alyssa Powers on behalf of Manatee County. So, Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
And let's get our important staff introduced to Ren Lee. This is our director, executive director, of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. And do you mind introducing other staff?
Sure. This is Charity Franks. Charity is new to us, but not new to the regional planning arena. Charity is our local emergency planning committee staff person. And also has worked in the arena of brownfields. And then Alana, can you introduce us?
Yeah, Mesli Mata is our new Science Policy Fellow for this year, so she'll be helping out the ABM or ABCM. And then we're also joined by Megan Blanchard, who's our coastal ecologist.
Okay, and we have some public people here. I met one of the ladies who's a scientist, environmental scientist. Would you all mind standing and introducing yourself?
I'm Connor Barley, living by now. I'm Ray Myman.
Thank you for being here. We're happy you could join us.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Can I-
but it's very important and I saved the best for last.
Oh, good. Okay, you're gonna take care of that.
I absolutely did. Don Kahn has been our attorney for how many years, Don? Well,
I bet it's longer. Yeah.
I think it's much longer than that. How about with the RPC?
Well, with both.
Well, anyway, he's one of the finest attorneys that I've ever had the opportunity to meet. And this is his last meeting. Gonna have you one more.
But I will be returning as a member of the public, so I'll be participating in a different capacity.
But Don, we appreciate you so much. Thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
As you will see, very likely I will be calling on him for different issues. Okay, so we're gonna move on to this and, yes, I already did. Okay, she keeps me on track. We do have two members from the public. Do you have anything that you would like to say before we begin the rest of the meeting? Either one of you? No? Well, we're happy you could be with us. The next on our agenda is approval of our minutes for June 13th. Oh, somebody on? Is there anyone online that wanted to make a comment? Okay. Listen, if you all see somebody that wants to make a comment, please do let me know, because we want to make sure, oh, there's one other person who's very important to this group. And I want to make sure you all know her because she kind of holds us together with the public. She's our transition, and that's Vicki Parsons. Vicki is the editor of our Nation Day Sound. How long have you been with us?
21 and a half years.
Oh my goodness, she's a treasure. I want you all to know that we've had quite a bit of work done between now and our last meeting, and we're going to get into that in just a second, but I do need a motion to approve our meeting minutes of June 13th. Someone give me a motion.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And before we move on, I want to let you all know, at our last meeting, you may recall that we had a discussion of adding coastal to the title of this agency because we're seeing that the relationship between all of the things that we do is not just bay management, but it has an awful lot to do with the coast, so. You will find an updated organizational statement as well as our operating procedures. They were approved by the full council over by the agenda, so they're over there. And they're also available on the Agency for Bay and Coastal Management's website. I just saw Jack Mariano come in. Would you please introduce yourself? He's a big shot in Pasco County. He's also on the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and very important to us. Jack, would
Thank
you?
you. I apologize for being late. I had thought my sister was gonna be coming in, but she said a resiliency conference. I'm Jack Mariano, Pasco County Commissioner. I've been back in 2004. I've been on the Regional Planning Council for many years, twice as chairman. I'm doing the vice chair for the statewide, so very interested in what's going on here and trying to make sure we have representation. So thank you.
And what he just said is very important because the Florida Regional Planning Council is comprised of all the different regional councils. And you are the chair or will be the chair, right?
Yes.
Good. We're going to have a very important agenda today. You remember at our last meeting, we began to talk about PFAS, you know what that is? That's assessing the chemical pollutants that are in our water. We as a group decided that water quality was one of our highest concerns that we would look at together. So with that in mind, we invited Dr. Steve Morawski, who is with the College of Marine Science. That's at the University of South Florida in St. Petersburg. And he is going to update us on some of the emerging concerns with what we call as PFAS. So we learned about some of the research being done by Dr. Bowden at the University of Florida. That's when we began to talk about management of this issue. And today, Dr. Morawski is going to share with us some of his findings. So Dr. Morawski, if you would, please.
And there's a clicker up there for your convenience.
Thank you all very much for the kind invitation to come over and talk to you today about our work over at the USF College of Marine Science. We've been involved in PFAS related work for a while. Our group originally started after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and we did about a decade worth of toxicology related research there. And then we transitioned a few years ago to looking at chemicals more in our local environment. And Maya Burke at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program funded a small pilot project that I'll talk about in a minute that really got us into what we're doing in Tampa Bay. And that has been the basis for developing a much more robust program over time in terms of looking at some of these chemical pollutant issues in the Bay. So, all right. Apparently our computer doesn't want to move my slides. There. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're calling the Tampa Bay Surveillance Project. Some background on emerging chemical threats. It's not only PFAS, but other things like pharmaceuticals and legacy pesticides, oil pollution, et cetera. So we're taking a broad brush look at chemical pollutants as they might be impacting the bay's biota and bottom sediments. And the reason we're doing that is most chemical analyses are one chemical at a time, one species at a time. And we're trying to look at the bodies, in particular in fish, as the holistic animal, as opposed to sort of a lab testing exercise. And so that's why we're working in the field. I want to talk about our objectives and strategies, our progress, and then I very much value the feedback that you all might give us on the project. So as I said before, we have about 13 years of experience looking at pollutant effects, and we started with Deepwater. In 2020, Maya Burke funded a small project, and that resulted in the publication you see. And we were looking at these PFAS compounds in both the sediments and the fishes in Tampa Bay. And again, this was a pilot project to see, number one, if we could detect these chemicals, and number two, how they might be distributed around the bay. And so in 2022, when Charlie Crist was a congressperson from St. Petersburg, we applied for a grant through congressionally appropriated funds, which we were happy to get. And so we started this project in 2023, and it's a project that'll run for about 5 years. One of the things that we've been doing is actually adding modules to this project as well. And in particular, we're very interested in human interactions with the environmental system. And so we've got a big project that the National Science Foundation just funded as an add-on, looking at subsistence fishing in Tampa Bay in terms of populations that might be at more risk than most of the safer recreational fishing population in the Bay. We have both the National Academy of Sciences, and then we also recently got a new grant from Sea Grant to look at barnacles in the Bay. And the idea about barnacles is you can put out like glass plates and have them recruit to the plates. And so you can do a lot of experimental ecology, looking at very specific areas in terms of the chemical uptake of mollusks, which are very different. They'll take up things from the environment that aren't necessarily processed by vertebrates. And then also, we can look at things like changes in the recruitment rates that might be affected by pollution. So we're happy to put all these modules together. So the pilot study that we did in 2020, this was in the middle of COVID, so it was a bit of a challenge, but we were able to work with the Environmental Protection Commission of Tampa Bay to do the sediment analysis. And then we also did some fishing around the bay to basically obtain a wide spectrum of different species. And so you see on the map here, at this point, we divided the bay into 4 different zones: Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and McKay Bay, the Middle Bay, and then the Lower Bay. And we also did some work out on the coast. The brown squares you see are basically wastewater treatment outfalls that we were able to sample. And so you can see that, we sampled up around the big outfall that the current plant has near Davis Island and Tampa Bay, and then down in Terracea Bay, up in Largo and Clearwater, and down in St. Pete. These were basically sediment samples that we took nearby those outfalls. And then you can see the distribution of the different fishes. If we look at the total PFAS concentrations, and these are in parts per trillion, in this case, dry weight, you can see that Old Tampa Bay and the Hillsborough Bay had relatively high levels in the sediments. Interestingly, McKay Bay had fairly low concentrations in the sediments. And then when you get down towards Terracea Bay, which is a very small outfall down there, you can see that chemical concentrations of PFAS were relatively low. If you look at the fishes, though, they do scale Old Tampa Bay, McKay Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and then the closer you get to the ocean, the lower the concentrations become, right? So you're getting more seawater, intrusion there. So obviously you're diluting the chemicals in the bay. The interesting thing is, if you look at the scale here, in the sediments, the average was about say Old Tampa Bay was about 1,000 parts per trillion. If you look at some of the fishes, they range up to about 15,000 parts per trillion, in one case, 30,000 parts per trillion. Now, remember, the new drinking water standard for PFAS issued by EPA is 4 parts per trillion. So these are levels very much different than what we're seeing in wastewater, at least in terms of the standards. So what we did was we looked at the individual species that we caught in this pilot study. And so there's a whole variety of things that we caught, a few specimens of each. And they ranged, from species like ladyfish and Corval jacks, which had very high levels of PFAS, to sort of mid-range, things like speckled sea trout, and also some of the catfishes in the bay, which we would anticipate being relatively high because of their interactions with sediments, down to some relatively low levels, particularly in the low trophic level fishes, the prey fishes, right? And so one of the takeaways from the pilot study is we only had a few specimens of some of the important recreational species in the bay: spotted sea trout. The most important recreational species are spotted sea trout, sheephead, red drum or redfish, and snook. And so what we wanted to do is focus the larger study on those species because those are the species people are going to interact with most in terms of the consumption of the fishes. So in terms of the sediment samples that we obtained, these are arrayed by the various sections of the bay. And so you can see the different chemicals that PFAS is a collection of chemicals that are industrial chemicals. They're in firefighting foam. They were originally invented back in the 40s for, washing army tanks and airplanes and other things. And so they have a wide variety of industrial uses. They're used in chrome plating, for example. And so there's a whole variety of chemical substitutions that go on there. Perhaps the most important one to look is PFOS, right? The black chemical there. That was one of the ones that had been banned. And so they're no longer in use. And there's a number of substitute chemicals that have come on the market that are less toxic, and they're called the Gen X chemicals. It's not anything to do with Generation X, but they're chemicals like 6,2-FTS. And it's interesting because if you look at the distribution of these chemicals by area, you have a very high level in Terracea Bay of the substitute chemicals, whereas you've got the legacy chemicals more in the upper bay, right? So, and these are the more toxic components of PFAS. So there's other recent studies that have been done in Tampa Bay area looking at a variety of other chemicals, which are actually the subject also of our study. There's a study on looking at microplastics and organic contaminants in Eastern oyster. There's another study on Eastern oyster looking at bioindicators of organic contaminants. And then there's been a statewide survey of pharmaceutical exposure, which included a total of 9 redfish individual specimens taken in Tampa Bay, which are incorporated in that study. We also did a study for EPA over on the East Coast in the Indian River Lagoon. We just completed, actually, the levels of PFAS that we found in that area are substantially higher than Tampa Bay. So, and for a variety of reasons, partly due to a large spill that occurred at Cape Canaveral. It was basically a big fire that was put out with firefighting foam, and all that foam actually drained into the Indian River Lagoon, and so set up a contaminant issue there. So our project objectives are a number of different things. We want to undertake collections of the water, the wastewater, sediments, invertebrates, and the vertebrate fish, looking at characterization, the spatial distribution, the sequestration of some of these chemicals. The PFAS chemicals in particular, they don't break down like normal organic chemicals. And so if there's a signature of them, they should persist in the sediments even as the sediment is sequestered by subsequent layers of sediment over the top. And so we've done a number of sediment cores in the northern part of the bay to kind of look at the history of the development of these chemicals that should show up. And as long as we're taking a sediment core in an area that's not disturbed by dredging or other things, you should see a chronology of these things. And that'll be very helpful to see, how these chemicals, where they're coming from, first of all, and then, how they're being substituted and whether that substitution is actually working, right? And so that's an ongoing study that we got going with Eckerd College. So we want to do not only looking at the chemical body burdens and things like fishes, but we also want to know something about the health of the fish. And one of the things that we learned from our Deepwater Horizon work was that you can actually look at things like the onset of liver cancer in fishes, et cetera. So if these high levels of PFAS and pharmaceuticals are having a health effect on the fish, we should be able to detect it in the histology of the animals. And so we've got a histologist working with our program to look at the various specimens that we've got. And so hopefully we can correlate this, the body burdens with this. It's the so-called so what factor. If the body burdens are there, but they're not having a health impact, then they're just there, right? So we want to characterize the associations between the various chemical contaminants as well. So as I said before, we're looking at PFAS, but we want to look at things like legacy pesticides over on the east side of the bay. It's more of an agricultural area. So we can even detect things like DDT still in the environment, and along with pesticides, there is also substitutes as well. And so we want to look at the full range of things. And if we can start to correlate the spatial distribution of the various contaminants, then maybe we can localize if they're coming from wastewater treatment, if they're coming from non-point source, runoff of streets and roads, et cetera, septic tank effluent, et cetera. And so that this will give us a better idea of the sources of the various chemicals, right? One of the parts of this project I was talking about for a little bit was actually understanding how all this plays out in terms of humans. And in particular, there's been a couple of studies looking at subsistence fishing in Tampa Bay, which is actually more prevalent than you would imagine, right? So, we all see people fishing off bridges, fishing at night, doing various things. They consume an enormous amount of fish relative to sort of the large average. And a lot of seafood safety studies actually look at the average consumption of seafood in terms of number of meals, as opposed to the people that are absolutely dependent on that. So they're more at risk if you look at the risk assessment that one would do with normal chemicals. So we want to try to characterize those populations, look at their economic status, where they come from, and also try to understand their meal frequency in terms of doing these assessments. And so from that, we want to develop these quantitative risk assessments for various subgroups in the Bay. And then obviously one of the outcomes is actually working with groups like you. We're trying to inform public institutions and advocacy groups about what's going on in the Bay and help try to answer your questions. So our study components are a field survey of fishes, oysters, barnacles, and sediments. We have a environmental chemistry lab that's it's very well equipped. We basically set this lab up in the midst of our Deepwater Horizon work. And so we've got the capability to do this in-house, doing the histological and morphological assessments of the fish that we've been capturing, do assessments of the historic use of chemical pollutants in Tampa Bay from the chronologies that we'll get from the sediment cores, assessments of fishery participation, meal frequency, species composition by diverse populations in the Tampa Bay region, and then of course the quantitative risk assessments. So in terms of the field studies, so we've actually divided the Bay into 6 regions now, so a little bit more granularity there. And we've gotten permits from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission to actually do this sampling. Some of these are regulated, they're all regulated species, and they have seasons and they have back limits and they have size limits, et cetera. So our goal is to obtain 10 individuals from each of the 6 regions in each quarter of a calendar year. So we're in the second quarter of our sampling right now, and I'll show you that in a minute. Our fish study will run through the end of March of 2025. And one of the aspects that we're really interested in is, as animals spawn, the chemicals we're looking at are so-called lipophilic, and that is they tend to bind to the lipids or the fats. And so as a female fish is developing, they actually offload their fats or their lipids into the fish eggs. So if they're actually taking these chemicals into the fish eggs, potentially you're looking at higher levels of toxic effect on the fish larvae than an adult. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is actually look at the uptake of these chemicals in the fish eggs as they're being offloaded to the next generation. And if that's a problem, that could be a very big problem in terms of long-term recruitment for these fish. So this is progress to date. You can see that we've got a broad range of sampling around the Tampa Bay. We need to do a little bit more in the sort of safety harbor area. It's a difficult area to sample because it's so shallow and you have to play the tides there a little bit. But we've been in all 6 of these regions, first quarter and second quarter. So far, we're using commercial recreational charter boats to actually do the fishing. They know where the fish are. They, scientists sort of know where the fish are, but fishers know where the fish are. We've got 4 excellent captains that we've been working with. So far, we've sampled about 330 fish. They're mostly spotted sea trout, snook, and redfish. This fall and winter, we'll work with the sheep's head, which are more easily caught in those seasons. And then the sediment coring, as I said before, around MacDill Air Force Base, et cetera. I wanted to mention that we've gotten special dispensation from both MacDill and the port of Port Manatee to fish in areas that are closed to the public. And so we did a number of, we've been doing a number of sampling trips that very close into MacDill Air Force Base there. And it's really interesting because the guides haven't been there in like 27 years. And so the fish concentrations in those closed areas are actually pretty phenomenal. And so they're basically marine protected areas. And so at this point, they're actually doing their job pretty well. We saw one school of redfish, like 500 redfish around in that closure area around MacDill. And I can tell you, they enforce their regulations religiously over there. We're very happy to work with our partners there to get permission to work in those regions. So far, so good in terms of the sampling. We'll try to do that Safety Harbor area and make sure that we get representative samples from there. We've sampled all kinds of habitats, both built infrastructure, and there's a lot more mangroves than you would think around Tampa Bay. And those are the places where snook and redfish are that's where they live. And so we've seen all the shallow water around Tampa Bay, right? We've caught a variety of fish. You can see, some of the important sport fish and a few of the fish that aren't targets, things like gag grouper. Actually, the other day I caught a Goliath grouper up off Davis Island, believe it or not. It was a pretty nice little, Goliath grouper up there. It was a juvenile, but nevertheless. I wanted to show this graph. This is probably hopelessly scientific, but as I said before, the fish are regulated by their sizes and open and closed seasons and bag limits. And so these are the size distributions of snook, red drum, and spotted sea trout. And the way they're regulated is in a slot limit, right? So you're allowed to take fish that are in that slot. So for example, in snook, you see that the slot is very narrow and it's like 70 to 85 centimeters, right? So they're very big, fish. And the idea there is snook change sex from male to female. And so you want to make sure that you preserve enough of the males to actually change, right? So that's a fairly narrow slot, whereas red drum has a fairly wide slot. And so we've sampled fish below the slot, in the slot, and above the slot. And one of the reasons we want to do that is one of the findings of our pilot study was that PFAS and other chemicals bioaccumulate. And that is, the older you get, the more you actually put on, because these fish are eating other fish that have a certain amount of PFAS concentration in their bodies. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to look at the very largest fish, because they are potentially having the highest levels of concentration. And if they're spawning, they may be offloading, to the juveniles. And so, and then of course, on the smaller sizes, what we're interested in is, when people are out there, shockingly, some people will take fish below the size limit and actually eat them. And so we need to make sure that we actually understand that process a little bit. So in our laboratory, we're processing for all kinds of tissue for a variety of different reasons. We want to understand the muscle for sure, because that's what people consume, but also the liver is kind of a prize in any kind of toxicological study. We all know if we had a couple cocktails, our liver is working overtime. Same thing for a fish. The liver is trying to process out these chemicals. And so looking at the bile and the liver system is really important. And that's where we're going to look for health effects in the animals as well. We're working overtime to buy freezers to freeze all these samples, and we're processing them for subsequent analysis. I wanted to mention that we have a collaboration with the undergraduates at Eckerd College to help us out. And this is their Scientists at Sea program. And so we've got a lot of interns that are working with us, and that's very helpful. Our newest addition to the research fleet is kind of an interesting thing, and I wanted to bring it up. The Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department recently bought a brand new 33-footer, and they donated their existing boat to us. And so we're adapting this for research, but it's a 34-foot Sea Ark, which is a really tremendous vessel and really helpful for the kinds of work that we want to do. So a really big shout out to Sheriff Cronster for donating that to us. Our ongoing work, we've completed Q1 and most of Q2. We're training our students and technicians to do all the extraction and chemical analysis in our laboratory here. We've initiated the liver and muscle analyses for PFAS. Again, as I said, we've got permissions from MacDill and Port Manatee to go into their restricted zones. We have an oyster sampling strategy that we want to do next year, and that will also be part of the barnacle study. We completed the sediment core work that we wanted to do on May 20th. And then we also have a website up and running on this. So I'm happy to give you all the staff the website address, and you can follow the program. Yeah, there it is. And so happy to keep everybody informed. And with that, really be interested in any comments you might have on the study, any holes that you see in this, and if there are particular areas or types of sampling that you think might actually help this study, we very much appreciate it. So with that, thank you.
Spoke with Dr. Morowski before the meeting began and told him that this is a group of students, brilliant scientists and environmentalists. And so he's prepared to answer any questions any of you might have. Welcome them. Yes, sir.
First of all, I'm not part of that student. And a couple other people. What method do you guys use for doing the analysis?
So there are a number of chemical methods to do this, but most of it's gas chromatograph, mass spec, right?
You know what EPA method it is?
It's the same one, yeah. I don't know the protocol number, but I can get it for you.
I'm asking that I seem to recall that their method changing like 2 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, you know what happens is the sensitivity of the instruments changes all the time. And so actually we've been working with the manufacturers of these instruments because they have so-called libraries. So, when you look at a mass spec, profile, actually identifying what chemicals are there, based on the signature is problematic, particularly, something so confusing as PFAS, right? So I think they're updating their profile, their procedures in order to do that, but
I think because the detection or the drinking water limit is so low, the detection method is super critical because you gotta be like
right.
on.
Yeah, I can tell you that, like, for example, when we're out sampling, for the fishes, we're basically putting them on ice and then bringing them back to the lab and processing the next day. You can't use like normal polyethylene bags because they have PFAS in them. So we have these special bags, basically they're PFAS free, which are the most brittle things you ever saw. And they're, sort of like ripping apart and all.
And then all of it.
Do you mind speaking up a little bit? We're getting some feedback that they can't hear you online. So do you mind just speaking up a little?
No, I don't have a big voice.
It's all right. It'll pick you up.
Or Steve, if you don't mind repeating the question.
Sure.
So was all of the fish collection done by real, like, was it netted or?
All of the fish collections we've done so far are with recreational guides and my students, right? And it's all hook and line. So terrible job to do, right?
Yes, sir.
So we have this concern in Sarasota Bay. We're seeing plastic seawalls going everywhere, polyvinyl chloride and fiberglass, basically, and we don't see oysters growing on them. And we're not quite sure how big of a deal it is, but I know that PFAS has been like attributed in parts to like, vinyl flooring, but are you guys looking into the potential for some of the seawalls that are going in as a source of them?
We haven't looked at that. I'll actually make a note on that. As I said before, we have an oyster study we're starting next year, and we wanted to use natural oyster beds, because you can get oysters up pilings and all kinds of things, and those are complicated because they're taking up things like whatever chemicals are used to preserve the pilings, and if you've got plastic jackets on them and all those things. So, but if that's a problem, we ought to actually incorporate some of that in what we're
All
dealing
the
with.
seawall replacements we're seeing in our area are going in as either fiberglass or PVC.
Interesting.
Have another question? Okay, Ed.
Hey, Ed.
Hey, Steve. Glad to see this work is continuing. I'll say the same comment to you as I did to Dr. Bowden when he presented some of this information. I'd encourage you guys both to collaborate, especially on the source identification side that you're talking about and some of the sampling he's done up in the watershed to further track down where the potential, where these constituents are entering into the estuary. So please work with one another. Don't be siloed in your approaches in terms of presenting this PFAS information, because it's important for us to understand the mechanisms of why it's by accumulating with some of these species in Tampa Bay and how it's getting into the water. And I know some of your sampling has been focused in and around some of the wastewater treatment plants, but a lot of those areas are also associated with airports where firefighting foams are often used in training activities. So I'll be sure that we're actually addressing this issue at the source and heading it from that point of view.
Yeah, thank you again for funding that pilot project, and we very appreciative of it. John Bowden is a close colleague. In fact, we had a big workshop on a lot of this last spring at the GomCon meeting in Tampa at the Tampa Convention Center there. And we're setting up a working group to actually look at this and having the folks at FIU and the folks at UF and others be part of this to actually understand not only, the prevalence of these chemicals, but perhaps more to the point, what can we actually do? If we identify, like, for example, if wastewater is a major contributor, are there actually remediation technologies you can employ in the wastewater treatment stream to actually reduce the level of PFAS, right? And so this is a big issue because of the drinking water standards that are now in force. And so we actually have some tabletop exercises where we're looking at things like electrolysis, for example, in terms of breaking down the heavy bonds in PFAS and whether or not that could scale up to be something like a technology that you might employ for 50 million gallons a day that might be coming out of the current plant, So very much this is an evolving issue and one that we need to keep on top of.
Okay, Commissioner,
Thank you.
that's Jack Mariano.
I was first elected to commission back in 2004. I found out all the distribution of the wastewater into the bay by the Harvard Carbon plant. I was happy to see that they improved it. And I tried to get it where we actually run a pipeline up to Pasco. We kind of like disperse it along the way to kind of minimize that effect. And one of the things that Tampa Bay Water we're doing is looking at the wells that do cause PFAS. I'm trying to get those wells shut down, not to just spread it out, but just shut them down so we don't put as much, minimize the effect of the PFAS going in. But I wonder how much have you studied what that effect is with PFAS going in there? Because if it's in the Tampa Bay water system, it's going to get filtered, it's going to be put in the bay. If you keep putting the same stuff in the bay over and over again, it's been going on for so many years. It may not seem like a bad effect, but it seems like it's having an effect. Please talk to that. I got a couple of questions.
Yeah, we're very interested in the cumulative effect over time, and this is why we're interested in the sediment collections, because that should show us if, in fact, we're building up a certain level, or whether or not the chemicals are being sequestered down, and so they become not available, right? So we've done a lot of sampling around that current outfall, and it's very interesting because there's a riprap shore right next to it, right? This is a big whirlpool that's out there, and there are snook and redfish right on that riprap wall, right? So they ought to be telling us, something that's going on. Now,
Go ahead.
sir.
We want to also recognize Noelle. She's with Eckerd College. She's online trying to go back. So Noelle, if you would please.
Hi, Noelle.
Hi, Steve. I just wanted to mention, Steve talked about the different populations that we suspect might be more subsistence fishers around the bay. I'm going to be working with Steve and our other colleagues on the social survey component of this NSF project. And I put this on the chat, but if anyone's interested in some of our previous work, I think the most significant finding to come out of it is that some of our surveys of shore fishers around Tampa Bay have shown that close to 20% of them could be meet the federal definition of food insecurity. And so some of those folks really are using the bay as a way to supplement their the protein in their diets. And that would be the population that we're, really most concerned about with some of these contaminants. So we're really excited to scale up this into some of these larger surveys that we're going to start hopefully next summer. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
And so to follow, the species you've chosen to study, I'm a little concerned that you didn't study more about the catfish or the bottom dwellers, where they're eating the sediments that have gone to the ground that are sitting there. When I look at what Homosassa did many years ago to find out that Kings Bay, they cleaned it all up. They found that this algae blooms would die and die and die. All the stuff would go down to the bottom, and it just was terrible. When they finally cleaned all that out, they're now thriving like crazy. So if you don't know what's going on at the bottom, and I would think the bottom fish would give you the best indicators, I think your studies flawed in the sense of you're just taking the upper waters as opposed to lower waters, which is where I think the problem is going to be caused is found in the bottom.
So in the pilot study we did, we actually sampled quite a few gap topsail and hardhead catfish, particularly up in McKay Bay. There's a lot of catfish up in there. And so you're right. I mean, the levels were relatively high. They weren't as high as some of these high trophic level fish that are the fish that eat fish that eat fish. Those are the ones that are bioaccumulating the most. But you're right. I mean, if the compounds are in the sediment and these animals are in contact with the sediment, they get it through their skin, right? As well as whatever they eat. The reason we focused on the species we did is we're very interested in human consumption, right? So, I mean, some groups may be eating some of the catfish, and if they do, that should show up in the surveys that Noel and others are doing. And we've reserved a little bit of our capability to actually sample the profile of like the subsistence fishers. So if they're eating things like catfish, we'll actually pick that up in the surveys and go ahead and sample them. So I hear what you're saying. Obviously, even with a large funded project like this, there's only so much you can do. And so if that's a problem, then we can adjust, the parameters of the survey to try to pick it up.
I think it'd be helpful. We just had a dredging project. The Anclote River went up and down with the Army Corps, ended a few months ago. And at the mouth of the Anclote River going into the Gulf, we had a high concentration of a scallop disease that was there. Now, it wasn't in the fish, but it was in the scallops. So that's why I say, I think looking at that, if we're trying to get to a solution about what's causing it, how to fix it, I think you need to focus more to the bottom in future stuff.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, obviously there was a red tide event up there, in Citrus County, I think. And so, that's been a problem. And, our project is more focused on the chemical contaminant side as opposed to the fertilization side of harmful algal blooms, but nevertheless, there's some interaction between them.
Again, with back to the Howard Cowan, with 60,000 gallons a day going in there, it's a lot. I'm not sure exactly what the number is, but it's a lot of water going in every day.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, did you have something?
I do, just real quickly. Good morning, Dr. Morowski. Mark Schremek, NOAA, National Marine Fisheries Service, work across the bay from you. Just a quick comment. I appreciated your comment. You said that the chemicals are alveophilic, so they would have tendency to accumulate on fats. And then just considering the species that you've been sampling, has there any consideration done to possibly include mullet? Just because I think of the road fishery later in the year. The challenge with that, of course, is that, to my knowledge, you can't catch mullet on a hook and line. At least I can't, so.
No, it's interesting. As part of the pilot study, Florida Fish and Wildlife has netting surveys that they do in the bay. They're out there all the time, and we actually did sample some mullet, for that. And as you said, they're relatively high. In the Indian River Lagoon study we did, there was a lot of mullet that we took in that study, and so yeah, they're because they're very fatty fish. They do accumulate quite a bit. And one of the things about mullet is people eat the mullet roe, right? And so if these animals are offloading into the roe and that's at a high level, then we really need to know that, so that's a good point, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Was there somebody else up here? Oh, yes. Please introduce yourself because I can't read you.
I'm Mary Keith, Tampa Audubon.
you were talking about the PFAS being sequestered in the lower sediment. But when we look at the bay, the dredging of the bay is gonna be pulling a lot of that up. Piling it on 3D Island, there's gazillion birds nesting out there and presumably fish around it. Are you looking at anything of what the dredging is doing to redistributing all of these PFAS across the bay again after they've been down and then they're gone out again? And then what is it doing to the birds that are living on those islands?
Yeah, I mean, obviously dredge spoils are going to be an issue, you know, particularly in areas where you've got fines, you know, fine sediments. These compounds bind to the fine sediments, you know, pretty prevalently. And so sampling the dredge spoils should be a, you know, a protocol that goes forward. And, you know, those, you know, we haven't really extended the study to the avian populations, but certainly that's something that, you know, we need to look at in terms of the total life cycle of these contaminants, right? Because we know some of these contaminants in history certainly had major negative impacts on breeding success in birds, you know, things like DDT and others. And so we really don't know about the impacts of PFAS in terms of that same level of interaction. But, you know, you know, mostly people have looked at sort of the contaminants in the water as opposed to understanding the ecological effects. And this is actually one of the few studies, and probably this study will probably be the broadest study in terms of looking at environmental impacts as opposed to documenting, you know, the contaminant levels, right? And so I take your points, and yeah, I mean.
Because if they're lipophilic, they're gonna be going into the eggs of the birds
Right.
and loading into
Yeah.
upcoming generations of birds, and some of those species out there are
Endangered species, yeah. Yep. So, yeah.
Hey, Tasha.
Hi, so kind of to focus on the sediment a little bit, you know, in the Tampa Bay region, we do, you know, a coordinated effort to do annual monitoring. You're kind of talking about quarterly frequency, which I think that's a fish, but sediment, do you see any of your work kind of informing on frequency of sampling? Do you think the once a year sampling is sufficient, or do you see this being an opportunity to look at some of these PFAS opportunities in the future? Because right now there's a lot of focus on the drinking water, but ultimately, as everybody's kind of talking about, we're going to be focusing on the sources. So I'm just curious if you're seeing any emerging frequency on that.
Yeah, you know, we're interested in both the spatial dynamics of what's going on and also the temporal dynamic, that is the seasonal one. So if you see our protocol in the fish, we're sampling quarterly, right? So we want to understand, you know, if there's a temperature interaction, you know, in terms of physiology of the fish, whether or not, you know, we can look back at the discharge rates, you know, from various wastewater treatment, rain events, those kinds of things. So, you know, it could be that, you know, the season divides into the rainy season and the dry season, right? So hopefully we, you know, we can put this picture together. One of the parts of our new study that Noel talked about was we're actually going to do a particle tracking simulation from all of the wastewater treatment outfalls. So this is Steve Myers and his colleagues do this kind of work. And so we did a similar particle tracking study for the Port Manatee discharge, right? And so you could see the distribution over time of these chemicals in the bay. So for example, if we do a particle tracking simulation from the Alfred Kern plant, that'll tell us, you know, on a relative basis where we expect those chemicals to go. And so hopefully we can correlate the spatial dynamics of that with what we're seeing in the fish and the sediments, you know, so that this is another avenue to get back to source tracking, right? And so hopefully we can figure that out. In the same way, there's I think 5 firefighting academies in the Tampa Bay region, right? And so, as I said before, firefighting foam is an issue, right? And so theoretically, we could actually trace those as well to see how that might interact.
More questions?
Hi, Victoria Oliu, Florida Fish and Wildlife. Thank you so much for presenting today. This is all super important and very interested in your study. I'm just curious about like an ultimate goal of your study? You know, if these findings mirror the findings from your pilot, are you hoping to ultimately inform a new slot limit? Or are you hoping to possibly inform people to stop eating fish coming out of Tampa Bay? Like what do you see coming out of this?
Well, we're not that far yet. Honestly, this is more of a surveillance project. What is the level of contamination? And, when we do the seafood safety risk assessments, that'll tell us whether we should be eating 8 meals a week or 3 meals a week or 50 meals a week. I mean, relative to it's multiplying the frequency of the meal, the size of the meal, the level of contamination of carcinogenic materials. And so there's a whole protocol that EPA has put together in terms of these things. So I wouldn't presume that we're not in the business of trying to shut people down. We're trying to collect some information. So I think it's up to you guys to figure this out.
Question, and I know a lot of people are.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is a great study. What's gonna happen? You put
Right.
all this together. And then you identify some of the causal factors. Do you think there might be some follow-up after your findings? The number one, correlate with other kinds of indicators that indicate that the PFAS is getting into our drinking water, our food supplies, and of course, as Mary mentioned, the animals. Do you think are there existing studies where this could be correlated, where we could
Sure.
actually see some action to help?
Yeah, our role here is to, collect some information and make it available to the decision makers, which are many of them are around this room. In terms of the level of risk versus the feasibility of ameliorating these problems. One of the issues that's come up in recent weeks, it was a big article in New York Times about PFAS coming out of the biosolids that come from wastewater treatment. And there was a big issue over in Fort Worth, Texas, where they were basically marketing the biosolids to farmers to put on agricultural fields. And basically they were relatively high in PFAS. There is some biosolid processing that goes on in Tampa Bay, and we're very interested in actually looking at the pellets from that to see if in fact they are a problem. So in that case, this would be evidence that could directly go into some decision-making in terms of how things would work. But we very much would want to work with folks around this room and others to actually understand the nature of the problems they have. And so if we can adjust these studies to be more relevant to the kinds of actions they want to take, then that's helpful. And thanks for the permits, by the way.
So online, Nancy Steven asked, will you be sampling sediment at the mouth of Hillsborough River?
Sorry, in the Anclote River, is it?
The Hillsborough River?
Oh, Hillsborough
Will
River.
you be sampling sediment from the mouth?
We haven't gotten up that far. I mean, we did some sediment coring around McDill and up the inside the major shipping channel up into Hillsborough Bay, but we haven't gotten into shallow water. Actually, we wanted to use our new boat, which is shallower draft than the other vessels that we've been doing, to do sediment coring up in the relatively shallow areas.
Yes.
So when you start talking about the residuals, it got me to thinking, about wastewater discharge. So Palmetto, for example, has a wastewater permit, but they don't roughly use it. They're basically reclaimed water, nearly 100% of the ESR. So they may not be operating, but one of the things I've noted in our watershed is no one has biosolids. Sarasota County doesn't spread biosolids. In Sarasota County, they send it to like Hardin County and DeSoto County. So one of the things that we're seeing in a lot of places, like Miami-Dade County's wastewater residuals go up to the St. Johns River watershed. So you may find if biosolids are an issue, a lot of the richer urban coastal counties are sending their biosolids to poorer water.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Extending the watershed. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, Phil Compton, Friends of the Hillsborough River. Just want to follow up on that last question about sampling at the mouth of the Hillsborough River. And of course, as you know, I did not understand before that there's bioaccumulation that is passed on to the larval stage. And I would love to see use of the boat that the sheriff gave you to go up into the Hillsborough River where fish go to spawn with the fresher waters, because that could be very interesting, not just for the river, but for the overall impact on the bay, because that's where a lot of that activity is occurring.
Yeah, up in the more freshwater areas, that's where juvenile tarpon are and,
Right.
a variety of other things. Tarpon are not a subject of this one because, hopefully nobody eats them. I mean, they're a prohibited species, but nevertheless, if they're having biological impacts, then that becomes an issue.
Yes, sir.
Can you reshare the slide with your URL for your study?
We have to minimize that window.
The previous slide, so,
Picture of them cutting
Yeah.
the fish.
just before your question slide, you had.
Yep.
Also, the presentation you can find online on the APN website.
Justin Trimble.
Okay, did you have a question? Yes, ma'am.
Justin Trimble has his hand raised online.
Yes, this entire thing will be online with.
Sorry, Justin Trimble has his hand up online.
Justin Trimble.
Hey, good morning, guys. Justin Tramble with Tampa Bay Waterkeeper. So, it seems like it's pretty clear that, although incomplete at the moment, it's pretty clear that this study, along with other studies, are sort of showing us that PFAS and PFOA, these emerging contaminants, are prevalent already in the bay. I was kind of curious, and this is probably way down the line, but I wanted to just sort of capture some of your opinions on whether or not beneficial reuse initiatives offer opportunities to help mitigate these issues, or if you see those as threats. I was just kind of curious.
So obviously, it's really interesting because Tampa Bay is under an edict to end ocean dumping of wastewater into the bay by 2032. Now, that's an interesting political dynamic at this point, and who knows if that'll actually happen. So what's going to happen to the water, right? So it could go into recharge in terms of aquifers. It could go into reuse and other things. Obviously, we want to understand the chemical profile of any alternative uses of the water. And so obviously, if we're just, changing the nature of one problem and making another problem, then that's counterproductive. But so that would argue that we actually look at the PFAS profile of the wastewater before it enters the system and understand that. So there actually is a large EPA-funded study that Tampa Bay, the components of Tampa Bay water are actually contributing to in terms of looking at the effluent streams, not only in Tampa Bay, but in a large number of areas around the country, in terms of trying to meet that standard. And so all that information will be really interesting to understand whether or not alternative uses of the wastewater present any different problems as opposed to, putting it in the bay.
If we would try to eliminate the dumping of effluent by 2032, is that to be based upon doing the injection, dumping of the water into the aquifer? Have you thought about that, or?
So these are large sort of political questions. I mean, what can you do with the water as opposed to putting it in the bay? I know people have looked at a lot of different options. We don't have any preferred, it's not our role to play here, but certainly, if that's the case, then, this is a large scale issue in terms of, what you're actually going to do with it.
Obviously, this is a major production, and Dr. Mawowski has offered to coordinate or talk to any of your organizations. If you're interested in having him come and speak to your membership. He said, not misquoting you now, am I?
No, you're not.
He's indicated that he would be more than happy to come and speak with your organization. And this topic of water, which all of you chose to be our major focus this year, is something we're going to continue to be visiting, and I'm sure we'll have you back. Because what you've shared, we're very interested in, and we're going to want to know the progress you're making, people you may be coordinating with. And our group could share with you maybe some of the projects they become aware of, because this is a very important issue to us.
Well,
Any other questions before we move on? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Kathleen Jonas, Tampa Bay Water. Just wondered, back in the day, we've heard for years about mercury in fish, warning us not to eat too much fish because of mercury. Have you done any correlations with any of those studies that were done in the past, or are you taking the opportunity? I know it's a lot of work to collect all these samples, to sample for other things like that.
we haven't done any metals, as part of this. That's a whole different, chemical analysis suite. There is a study going on in McKay Bay. I know Hillsborough County is very interested in that, and they're going to be doing some metal work as well. And we've talked about coordinating with the folks at Tampa Bay Watch who are interested, Tampa Bay Estuary Program, who are also interested in this. So stay tuned on the metals part.
Have you tried to correlate it with any past studies that were done, like with distribution of mercury?
No, we're sort of at the early stages of this, but your point about correlating different chemical inputs is really important because we're trying to look at the animal as a holistic thing as opposed to one at a time. And we know that some of these chemical inputs, like from non-point source, they're correlated as well. And so trying to decipher the code a little bit in terms of what's correlated with what is really an important aspect of this.
Sediments also, and fish get sick.
Yeah, it could be that mercury contamination is not going through the wastewater system. It's coming in from other plant sources, et cetera. And so this is the issue at MacDill, for example. Obviously military bases have been a source of this in a number of places in the country of PFAS, but there are other things that emanate from military facilities as well, right?
Alana?
Sorry, before you speak, I just wanted to, I guess, invite you to come in the future and also get all of us to think about what we could do individually, at our own organizations to address this problem, but then what we can do collectively. I mean, at what point, it's great to discuss this, but at what point do we go from a discussion to actual management as the agency on Bay and Coastal Management? So what can we do to help with this issue? Maybe it's a big public education campaign building on the findings from Noel and Steve. Putting up signage in multiple languages to let people know, how many meals they can eat that fish or something else. So I guess that's my homework for you all is to really start thinking about what we can do individually, but then also as a collective, as the agency on Bay and Coastal Management. Ed, you had a question?
Just to follow up on some of the comments regarding McKay Bay and other contaminants concerned. There's been some prior studies on whole fish sampling in McKay Bay, and a lot of the constituents that were found in snook, mullet, pHs, heavy metals correlate pretty closely with the PFAS and PFOA accumulation that Steve's work has shown in the pilot study. So they're probably, they're in these depositional areas. If the fish are in these depositional areas that are bottom oriented, sort of feeding on and accumulating these toxins from eating a lot of fish, then those are the species that are, showing hits across the board on contaminants that are coming primarily through, we suspected stormwater in some of that early McKay Bay work. And there was a call for management to actually do some additional base flow monitoring for stormwater both in dry and wet season to understand what the sort of legacy loads of some of those older contaminants were going into the McKay Bay watershed. So again, all this I think builds on one another, that the next step is what are the primary sources contributing these contaminants to the ecology, and how do we best address those sources?
Any other questions before we move on? All right, I want to personally thank you on behalf of our organization for coming. The information you shared is very important to us. We will be asking you back, and I invite all of you after the meeting, when you get home or in your office, follow up online, look at the website, look at the provisions that you may be providing to us. And of course, Alana will have summaries available for you all as well. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot.
Well, I'm going to move on to item number 6, which is an issue that I'm sure every one of you is aware of in one capacity or another. And we've been reading a lot about proposals for the development of our state parks. There was a lot of public backlash, I guess is the proper word to use, on a proposal that was presented to the general public. And I understand that that proposal's been tabled for now, but this very well may not be the last time that we see this initiative. A development proposal such as this poses consequences to our state parks, many of which are comprised of environmental significant issues that deviate perhaps from the original intent of some of the land use that was set up for these parks. We thought it was appropriate for this meeting to have a proactive discussion among the agency members about future development of Florida state parks. This is a controversial proposal. There's some people who feel one way, some another. We're depending on you with your particular scientific and environmental awareness and knowledge to share your thoughts with us. And understand, you know, we've revised our operating procedure. No decision is taken or any discussion by our agency. It's not binding on any organization. And for member who's serving on this agency. So please feel free to discuss what you're going to say openly. And we expect that we're going to get some feedback. But we're joined today by a special guest who's going to share with us some of her experience with this issue of Representative Lindsay Cross. And she's going to go ahead and start our discussion, after which we will invite you to talk about some of your concerns and potential recommendations to consider for the future. Okay, is that it?
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning. So I'll just start by saying this is kind of a full circle moment for me. I know many of you from my 14 years at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and it was being here at our quarterly policy board meetings with many of you who have served, continue to serve on that organization, that I developed my interest in policy and led me eventually to be elected as the representative in this district here, District 60. So it's really special for me to be here, and I appreciate, Alana, you reaching out. I know that you wanted someone from DEP to come, but they've been a little tight-lipped on this. So happy to share my perspective as a member of the State House of Representatives. Just included a couple of the relevant assignments that I have. I'm the vice chair of the Climate and Energy Caucus. I also served on the Agriculture and Natural Resource Appropriations Subcommittee and was a member of the Water Quality Supply and Treatment Subcommittee. So those were my assignments for the 2022 through 2024 sessions. So I won't go into a whole lot of the background because I know that many of you have been keeping up with this issue, but we were alerted about this about 3 weeks ago around August 19th. I know that I was in Chicago at the DNC as a delegate when I got pinged that there was an attempt to try to develop our state parks, and that in just a week, there were 8 public meetings scheduled to discuss impacts to 9 of our state parks. The closest one being Honeymoon Island State Park up in the Dunedin area, but some significant potential revamps to our state parks, including golf courses, what were deemed as lodges, but really up to 350 bed hotels in several of them, pickleball courts and disc golf courts in many of them. And as you know, there was a huge backlash from the public. This was some footage from the Associated Press from a press conference that was held about a week later. This is myself speaking in front of many concerned members of the public up outside of the Honeymoon Island State Park. And about a day later, the governor kind of walked back his support of this, which was called the Great Outdoors Initiative. Since that time, or, throughout that time, due to some really fantastic reporting by the Tampa Bay Times, Max Chesness, other reporters around the state, we've learned more about that, that the governor at some point earlier in the year was approached by a nonprofit called the Folds of Honor with the recommendation to put a golf course at the Jonathan Dickinson State Park as a way to provide golf opportunities for members of the veteran community. We know that about 10 years before that, then Governor Rick Scott had proposed a golf course in one of our state parks. And again, public pushback on that. And so that was tabled. During the leading up to this press conference, we also learned that a land swap of a fairly large magnitude had happened earlier this spring in Citrus County at the Withlacoochee State Forest, that the Acquisition and Restoration Council authorized a land swap of about 324 acres for creation of a golf course up there. So that's something that I didn't specifically include in this proposal, but something that I think we need to look into. And then just earlier this week or over the weekend, we learned that this Great Outdoors Initiative potentially could have touched 17 more of our state parks. So this was not just an isolated, approach, something just limited to that Jonathan Dickinson State Park. That nonprofit has since kind of rescinded their interest or their application in that. But as a member of the legislature, we still don't know where some of these other ideas came to. From our interpretation of it, this is something that was a direction from the executive agency, executive office, from the governor's office to staff at DEP and state parks to look at this, and then had a very rushed and largely secretive kind of rollout to alert the public of this. And since then, these things have been tabled. Looking at the mission of the state parks, it's to provide resource-based recreation while preserving, interpreting, and restoring both natural and cultural resources. The state parks were established in 1935. We currently have 175 parks. The last one was established in 2017. That was the Ruth Kirby Gilchrist Blue Springs State Park in kind of central Florida. That was the last one in 2017. Since that time, we've had an influx of about 2.5 million more people in our state. Clearly, there is a need for more outdoor recreation and access to our natural areas. But as I mentioned in that press conference a few weeks ago, changing the look and feel and the configuration of our parks is not accomplishing that mission, particularly if we're really trying to focus on preservation and restoration of natural and cultural resources. We're looking a little bit into some of the existing statutes around management plans and around our conservation and recreation lands. So these are some areas that myself and members of some of the House staff have been looking at places where we may be able to tighten up statutes in coming years. But historically, if you had the desire to modify our state parks, proposed management plans of the magnitude such as the golf course in Jonathan Dickinson State Park would have required a review process that included local public hearings and a really thoughtful review by something called the Acquisition and Restoration Council. This ARC Council includes members that are members of different organizations such as FWC, Forestry, of the Division of Historical Resources. A lot of these times, these are designated by the governor himself. Right now, there are 7 members of the ARC Council. There should be 10 members, so there are some vacancies in this board. But this is the group that does help to approve new acquisition, new conservation easements. Many of these have to go before the cabinet for approval if there is large state funding that's associated with that through expenditures through the Florida Forever program or the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. But it does go through a review of this ARC Council. And so their responsibility is to evaluate, select and rank some of these projects for purchase or for easements, and then to review some of these management plans. These are generally done on a 10-year time frame. So these management plans do have a schedule for update. But if there is something that is happening in the middle of that time period, it should be going to these ARC members. Just putting up one of these statutes. This statute is related to conservation and recreation lands and really tries to outline some of this review process for the public. Again, these outdoor recreation activities are meant to be compatible with conservation and protection of public lands. I've added the bold and italicized here just to point out some areas that I think we need to be looking at our existing statute. And for some of these larger developments, these management plans for parcels over 160 acres would have to go through this development, this review from an advisory group with at least one public hearing. Generally, our state agencies are having one or more public hearing and are also providing adequate time for the public to be notified about this. We know in this process for the Great Outdoors Initiative, the public notification process was very abbreviated. It was meant to go out just a week before 8 public meetings were being held. And some of that information we've learned was leaked to some members of the press by an employee at DEP who was creating some of these maps and was kind of alarmed at some of the proposed impacts to our state parks and how that really was not consistent with the mission. Statute 253.034. Again, this is related to the management of our state parks. Again, looking at how they can be managed to ensure the conservation of plant and animal species. Within some of these goals, it does include public access and recreational opportunities, but as many members of the public and elected officials noted, pickleball and golf courses do not seem to be in line with appropriate public access and recreational opportunities in our state parks and some of our other conservation areas. I want to point out a bill that came to us this year in the legislature because this has been mentioned as something that may have helped to facilitate this proposal from the nonprofit for this golf course in Jonathan Dickinson. This is a bill that I saw in our first committee, in our Constitutional Rights Committee. So it's HB 781, and this is related to unsolicited proposals for public-private partnerships. And I've looked back at this bill, spoken with one of the bill analysts, gone back and looked at the recordings. And even though it seems like there maybe could have been a connection here, I don't believe that there is. This is something that applies to something that's called a responsible public entity. And that's defined in state law as being, for example, local governments such as county, municipalities, school districts, special districts, or other political subdivisions. And the intent of this bill was that if an entity wanted to bid on or bring forward a proposal to a city or a county, they could do it without opening up a competitive bid process, potentially to save the local municipality money, to expedite that. You know, this is probably something that will come under some scrutiny this year, but the Department of Environmental Protection and other state agencies, from how I interpret it, do not fall under a responsible public entity because and maybe Don can kind of fact check this, but the responsible public entity could have been if this came to a county or a city rather than a state agency. So going through this, we don't feel that there is a clear linkage in this. And also looking at the time frame for when this nonprofit came to the governor to discuss this proposal and the lobbyists that were involved with it, there's not a clear linkage with that. But I think something that will be discussed probably in the upcoming session. So that's just kind of some of the legal background about this. Alana wanted me to come and kind of be here to talk about how this group has reacted to this, if you have reacted to it, and what we might do in the future to try to prevent something like this happening in the past. I can assure you that if reelected, this is an issue that I'm going to be looking at. I know one of our senators, Gail Harrell from the Stewart area, has pledged to do some work on this in the coming session. But looking at if there's anything we need to do to our existing statutes, potentially to narrow the scope of what is classified under public access or recreational opportunities, potentially if there's something that we need to do to tighten up the review for the management plans. There are other task forces or councils where we do have vacancies. And I know members of environmental organizations are always trying to push to have those vacancies filled so that meetings can be held, that they have a quorum, and that they are going through that public review process that is designated in our state statutes. But how we can make sure that something like this doesn't fall through the cracks, or that that we have an appropriate separation of powers from the executive, the legislative, and our judicial branches. So that's kind of a short recap of where we are about a month after this coming to light in the public, and wanted just to be able for you to share what, if anything, your agency has done. I know many of you may have been precluded from speaking publicly on this, but under the guise of the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management and the RPC, if there are roles that you can play and ways that you can support the legislature in evaluating maybe amendments or future legislation to address this.
You've heard from Representative Cross. Anybody have something they'd like to say or a question you'd like to ask?
It seems like, Lindsay, there's opportunity for that last bullet point, in terms of further defining the scope, the definition of what resource-based recreation might mean for our public land. Seems like there could be bipartisan support for that sort of initiative to further constrain what we want to do on our public lands as being in the state of Florida. So to me, that seems like the most logical next step. There's that bipartisan support in reaction to the great outdoor initiative on both sides. Then we should be talking about what does resource-based recreation mean on our public lands, and how best can we define that in state statute.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Did you want to respond to what he said? I'm going to move on.
Sure.
Yes.
Kind of related to that is that maybe there could be language that kind of guides it towards where other opportunities aren't available. I know in Sarasota, we've just shut down 2 golf courses because of the lack of usage. I used to live in Pebble Creek in Tampa where that shut down. So where is the lack of golf courses that we apparently need? And where I live as well, we've got tennis courts being converted to pickleball. So I understand the need for like golfing and pickleball and all that, but I just don't understand why you'd have to use a state park to do those opportunities, particularly in golf courses that are actually closing down from lack of usage. So maybe like the language could be public access or recreation opportunities not available elsewhere. Would be some sort of like language that people live with.
Yeah, Dave, I'll note something that I think I included in a formal letter to the DEP secretary is that we do have a pot of money called FERDAP. which is specifically for more recreational based parks. So if the city of Largo wants to have a baseball field or soccer fields, that's a place where FERDAP money, state money could be used for that. And so, there is an established fund of money that has been at around $10 million a year for some of those projects. So we do have that. I'm always advocating for more money for these projects. Our conservation programs have been historically underfunded since the recession in 2008. So we have allocated money through the Land Acquisition Trust Fund that hasn't been fully allocated. And we do have pots of money that could go towards more pickleball courts.
Good, yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking, I was just at a lecture and a person was talking about how many people have moved to Florida and how they don't really know what, a lot of us have been involved in this stuff for years. And we know how when these statutes, whatever were developed, what they were all about, but you have new people coming and they have no clue. They look at parks and whatever, and they think, oh my goodness, maybe we're not doing as good of a job as we need to educate the public. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't mean it that way, but I mean, it just occurs to me that I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, my gosh, didn't you know how we fought to make sure that these kinds of things wouldn't happen? And if you have this many people moving to Florida and you have people politicians or whatever in office that aren't aware, this is going to happen. And when this happened, I thought, oh my gosh, what was it, 10 years ago when Governor Scott was proposing a golf course and we were all going, what? So I don't know what exactly the answer is. That somehow we need to raise public awareness as to why we have that. And then there are things that need to be done to narrow the scope, but that public awareness, and I guess perhaps with what's just happened, there's a lot more public awareness now than there was before. But maybe sometimes we sort of, I don't want to say rest on our laurels, but we take things for granted. And, obviously we can't, because this is going to happen again.
Yeah, Sally, I think that's an important point. I think also from the huge amount of public involvement, I'm still getting emails to my office about this. It's very clear that people love their parks, and people in Florida also consistently approve tax increases for conservation and for water quality protection. I believe that this is something more from the executive level that was not grown from public interest, but rather was a top-down thing where the public pushed back on this. And so I think our residents and our visitors really appreciate the natural Florida, the real Florida. And there's some maybe people who are trying to derive private financial benefit from these public resources. But always important to educate our new residents.
Lindsay, what's the existing scope for development? In other words, are we allowed to just develop lodges with 100 units, or is it limited to a pickleball court or a tennis court, no overnight accommodations? Where is the scope right now versus you want to propose to narrow it?
Are you talking about the scope of the Great Outdoors Initiative right now?
Yeah, where is it to where it's allowed? I saw a photo where they were developing a lodge, possibly. So it goes from there to how far is that?
Yeah, so the original proposal that we saw a couple weeks ago impacted 9 state parks. Honeymoon Island would have included pickleball courts. A couple other of them had pickleball courts or disc golf. There were 2 parks that were slated for 350 bed lodges. Jonathan Dickinson had the golf course on it. And so there were varying levels of recommended improvements, if you will. The statute related to the updating of the management plans looks at a 160 acre footprint. So I still don't know if there's something that's a smaller footprint, what the specific pathway is for the agency to go through review. If there's proposals to add more cabins or more camping facilities, that I think would go through a different review than something more extensive like 350 bed units. But that may be another place where we look at, is there a process that's thorough enough that includes public participation for any of these changes beyond, regular maintenance or restoration?
So I think part of this has been, we haven't had a specific position or anything on this, but some of the stuff that I've kind of seen come through from public comments and some social media opportunities is, jurisdiction was the first one, like it's state parks. It's technically, regionally, what is the jurisdictional, availability for any of the, I guess, positions. But I think it is important, and maybe something to think about regionally is some of the economic, like we know the impact, we can anticipate, we have information on the impacts environmentally, ecologically, and whatnot, based on some of the statutes and the science community. But, some of the things that I kind of thought about were, how would this impact if we start developing and having these almost tourism based, opportunities on a state park, unless we have a funding source from tourism and the bed tax and whatnot that funds local initiatives and whatnot. That's something we have to think of as state parks, because we're probably not gonna have that same relationship with them where we're gonna be charging another governmental or public entity like we would a private enterprise. So I'm kind of curious if we would care if there's information to look at the impacts of developing parks in these more privatized or taxable or tax-based activities on, local governments. But I'm not an expert at that. I don't know the ins and outs of that. Kind of economic analysis, but just something I was kind of curious about.
As I understand it, the issue's been taped.
Mhm.
And the concern is it will be resurrected sometime in the future. And here we're hearing a general concern. It is not really a partisan issue. It's a concern from us anyway about the protection of our natural resources. The fact that people come to Florida not because they want to see Chicago or Philadelphia again. They appreciate the environmental issues we have here as well. And that does correlate directly with the economy. And there's so many other things that we can think of, but I'm sure that as we think about this, that our organization may have some ideas as to some of the things that could be considered as far as the general consensus that may be improving the language that defines what our state parks are. Maybe that includes in some of these review groups or organizations, a stronger element that emphasizes our personal concerns for providing open space and protecting our natural resources. It's inconceivable to me, just as I believe we were saying earlier, we don't golf courses, but I don't think that it's going to be lifted up anytime soon because the public have been involved. Perhaps what we can ask you to do is keep us involved as to the status of this issue. Because public awareness is the strongest tool that we have. Because the public, in case some elected officials forget about it, they got here because the public thinks is important, and what this group particularly thinks is important because every member of this organization was very well selected because of their knowledge and their experience and their willingness to share that with you. So you can feel free to come to them and ask them if there's some environmental input they can give to you in your decisions. Having said that, I'm going to shut up
I have one more thought. When we, years and years ago, when we did our study on the future of Tampa Bay with the Tampa Bay Study Commission, one of our top priority, actually, because I remember Rich Paul came up with it, was economic. And some of us environmentalists were going, huh? But I mean, everything sort of is driven by economics. And when you're talking about economics, I think what happens sometimes is people don't seem to realize that these parks are economic engines and they bring in tourism and whatever. It's just the right kind. And maybe people aren't aware. They think, oh my gosh, well, we could make a lot more money if we have a golf course or this or that. But then that takes away from a treasure we already have. So I think that's kind of education. And that's kind of where I think we fit in, making sure that the difference is understood. I don't know what that is in what you're trying to get out of us.
Okay, Vice Chair, I have something to say, and then we'll come back down.
Well, I'm gonna answer a question first. My agency didn't officially respond, but I changed my cover photo on Facebook to Jonathan Dickinson State Park. I think that's how most people responded. The last two comments kind of hit on a lot of things I said. I think defining the role of a state park is important and being more clear on that. And you mentioned, I think the unsolicited bids is under the 253, is that right? Or how?
781.
So it always gives me pause when I hear that the state's gonna look at things that can happen in cities because of an issue that happened in the state, right? So in our city, we have a 50-acre old landfill that nothing's been done for 50 years, and we had an unsolicited bid. In fact, it involved pickleball. But that went to the voters because because of the way our charter is, and it failed. But accepting those unsolicited bids is important for cities. And I think I always hate when the state looks at taking those rights away from cities and counties, because it took 40 years for any developer to take the risk of opening up that landfill to do improvements so that the public could access it. And so it'll probably be another 40 years as a landfill, unfortunately. Right now, we're working actually on a wildfire path that I brought from somewhere else, but that's the only use for it, really. And so please be careful as you talk about taking away the powers that local governments have. And then the last thing was, I think we are pretty. You ask about consensus. I think our consensus is don't do anything unreasonable in our state parks, right? And there was several things that were certainly unreasonable in that proposal.
Yeah. So Mayor Brown, I want to comment on that. This bill doesn't take away your ability to receive unsolicited proposals. Yeah.
Okay, before you, there was somebody over, yes, Joseph.
I have a question. You said the individual management plans are required for parcels over 160 acres. Do you think that 160 acre limit is too broad with the number of state parks being under 160 acres?
I think that's a question that, along with maybe tightening up the language about what public recreation is appropriate, maybe looking at what triggers more extensive review could be. Maybe that is smaller. I don't know if Honeymoon Island is 160 acres. I'm sure it's not that large, but 160 acres is probably larger than some of these parks in totality.
Let me go here and now.
Lindsay, I don't know what the current law is, but let's all face the fact that if it weren't for that whistleblower, that none of us would have known what had happened, what's happening until it was too late. And I'd be interested, if I were you, in looking at the current legal protection for state employees who have the cojones to speak up, because the stories that I read in the Tampa Bay Times noted that there were colleagues who also knew this, but they feared for their jobs. And this is my own opinion and not a state or city or county employee, and current administration, there is reason, obviously, to fear for one's job. And I just hope that everyone who does work for a government agency recognizes that the public responded to this person's firing with contributing almost $250,000 to his GoFundMe account. So he's okay. in this case, but you know, that the public does have your back. But then again, employees should not fear for their jobs when something is clearly off base, when the process that's legally required has been subverted, in an attempt to push something through very quietly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one of the questions is where are protections for employees if they feel like something is contrary to the mission of the organization? Because I think the justification that DEP had was that, you know, these were draft plans. They were not ready for public review yet. So they had some, you know, some legal backing that they had, but is there something that should supersede that in being consistent with the mission of these agencies that are entrusted to, you know, support operations of our state?
Thank you. Was there a comment over here? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Mary Keith Campbell Audubon. And I'm gonna speak. You have public access up there and also talking about the economics of things. Speaking particularly of Hillsborough River State Park. The great majority of the park is not accessible to anybody right now because one bridge has been closed for 5 years, I think. And the other bridge was damaged a year and a half ago, and they haven't been repaired. And the swimming pool that used to be very popular because they're not allowed to swim in the river anymore, it's been closed for 7 years. Is there any way of putting anything in the statutes that what's there already needs to be maintained before they start putting these other things in? And also just in terms of thinking about, I mean, the thought of putting pickleball when so many housing, you know, apartment complexes, people are complaining about the bing bong, bing bong, bing bong noise of pickleball, and they're gonna put it right in the middle of the park. You would be able to hear it from the campground to the far end of the picnic area. You're just taking the pollution of the city and bumping it into the parks. And I don't know what the situation is with the other parks, but Hillsborough River is our park.
Yeah.
And they can't maintain what they have, much less tear out the trees to put something else in.
Yep.
How can that be built into the regulations to help protect what's there for future use?
So thank you for raising that, Mary. I think, you know, each of these parks does have a management plan, which should have annual maintenance of some of these amenities.
Committee, but they reviewed the last annual plan for Hillsborough River.
Okay. As a member of the Ag and Natural Resources Appropriation Subcommittee, I'm often calling for more funding for these state agencies to do management, to do restoration, to create new parks. I think this is an opportunity to really justify why we need to better fund these parks, to fully utilize the resources through the Land Acquisition Trust Fund. I mean, clearly people are accessing our parks, but when we have 2.5 new residents since our last park was created, I think we could make a strong case that we need to set aside more land for conservation and appropriate recreation. So I'm hoping that there could be something positive that comes out of this that could result in more parks.
Representative, how long have you been a representative?
2 years.
2 years. In this room, like Jack, Mayor over here and others know what it's like to deal with these public things, so you'll probably get quite a bit of feedback. And I encourage you all to contact her individually too with any idea that you might have across to you. Here is her information, her social media and her contact information, our offices. This will also be included in the report. Alana has something she wanted to add, and then. Oh, my gosh, okay, again, sorry, she has to go next.
So I would like to propose a resolution from the Agency on Bay and Coastal Management that we present to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and support, you know, what Ed was saying, that in our state parks, that the management plans that are put together by members of the public contribute every 10 years, that those be the management guidelines. And also that resource-based recreation be the kind of top of what is allowed in terms of development. The public comes to our parks to walk, to bird watch, to do photography, to do kayaking, to do bike riding, to do horseback riding. All of these kinds of activities are resource-based. They get the people out where they're with nature, which is so important for our mental capacity as a public. But the other thing is the parks are also providing huge economic values. And we've written those up in our Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council report. So we can use that background too, what they're doing in terms of air and water quality, what they're doing in terms of stormwater protection, all of these things that are really an economic value and that will be lost if we develop them. We put in a golf course that now requires chemicals and so forth. These are really negative things to put in our state parks.
Reinforce, your idea is to reinforce the concept that the primary concern that we have as a council is protecting our natural resources, and that re-emphasizing the fact that the state parks and other parks are to focus on those things. Rather than getting into too many specifics, that's just not a cool idea. But re-emphasizing what you said.
Yeah.
Is that a
So-
motion?
That's a resolution.
Second.
You'll add Don word.
That's a motion. I'll second it.
Thank you. Yes.
I would like to add just sort of a friendly amendment to what you said, Anne. I think there's opportunity within our group in and of itself, based on Mae Brown's comments as well as Sally, to come up with consensus on the term of what resource-based recreation means within our state conservation lands. And we can lead as a region with sort of telling the state what we feel is acceptable for the state parks within our region. And if that's part of that motion, I would third it.
Do you have a suggestion or a definition?
I think it lists some of the things that Ann was saying. I just want to make sure that we come as a body with, up with a
That if
consensus
if
definition.
this issue comes up again, we want to have a voice in it.
Yeah.
As an organization. Is that generally what you're saying?
And I would really like to encourage the Regional Planning Council, you know, to forward this on to the appropriate, to the governor's office and the state parks, Department of Environmental Protection, et cetera.
I got it. Got it.
And I'll make a transcript of this too.
That you follow him. Yeah. Okay.
I was suggesting in addition to resource space, maybe passive resource space might be a good word to use.
Thank you.
Okay. Without further discussion, Natasha.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's also offer to give feedback to cross, and maybe this is something we can look at. 'Cause there's a few things, I don't want to belabor it here, but there's a few things in what was presented in the statute that maybe we can provide comment, and maybe that's something we can tackle on the legislative.
I want to suggest that we don't want to get into too many of the specifics, that we have a little more wiggle room. We incorporate the concepts you all have talked about, particularly the concerns of ABCM. But and all the things you're concerned about would certainly be addressed, assuming if any of these proposals came within our area, that we would be invited also to have a review of this. pointed that, yes.
So, and the reason I wanted to make sure this was on the agenda was because they said they're tabling this issue, which to me seems like it's going to be back, but it's gonna be even more subtle than this. We're not gonna be able to count on a whistleblower. And you mentioned this briefly, Representative Cross, but is everyone aware of that land swap of 324 acres in Citrus County that just happened in June? The state has, from what I'm reading, that Florida cabinet approved of this swap of 324 acres in the Withlacoochee State Forest to Cabot Farms because it's bordering that property. And then Cabot Farms is giving them some acreage a few counties north that was timberland. And the Florida Council said that the move granted the state permission to determine that the land is no longer needed for conservation purposes. It was added to their agenda only 5 days before the meeting. They didn't have any public comment and it was approved. So I think that might be a similar approach that's taken in the future, and we might not have opportunity to comment, which is why I wanted to get it on the agenda for this meeting. Because I think it is important that if you want to send a letter of support or we have a resolution and we maybe offer some guidelines, that could be helpful.
So
if we're
what you
allowed
all
to do
said
that.
was very important. We'll make sure it gets in the right hands.
Isn't that part of the wildlife corridor?
I'm
Adjacent
sorry.
to the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which is something that we're supporting. There's been legislation and all that, so it sort of flies in the face of what's going on.
And then the new acreage that they're swapping, and from my understanding, what I read on one website was that it's to expand the citrus industry, and that is not part of the wildlife corridor. So
But
yes.
was that finally approved? The last update that I had from the Tallahassee, Florida Audubon office was that it had been proposed, but it was not yet finally approved. The property that they're getting is 800 acres of pine farms over in Levy County or something like that, that's not connected to any other conservation area, but the last update that we had from Audubon, Florida was that it was pending, but not yet finally approved, so.
Well, I'm seeing
do
that
you know if
cabinet.
that was approved or?
Okay, may I stop this conversation right now? We have a motion on the floor. And we need to get that approved, and then let's do that first, and then I've got another suggestion to address exactly what you said.
Madam Chair,
Is there any more objection to the motion? What's the
Could I
motion?
make-
Dawn's gonna, yes, go ahead.
just a point of clarification. This has been a pre-discussed, obviously a matter of great importance and interest to all of them. Yeah. I would propose that we draft up a resolution. We don't have a resolution in front of you today. We have ideas that have been expressed. I would think the members of this group would want to see the actual resolution before it is represented as the position of the body. So I would recommend if this motion passes, we bring back to this group in December, resolution for your consideration and approval. And changing it if you feel necessary.
Yes.
So, from all the discussions we've heard on golf course, et cetera, and I'm a golfer. And I'm not saying we should go put a golf course at any place, anytime. But I'll tell you, this, the swap at Cabot might be a very good thing for that business to thrive with the investment they've made up there, redoing the whole place. Pebble Creek, that development over there, you got apartment pressures. You want to talk about apartment pressure, we get them in Pasco County. We destroyed a really good golf course area called Southbrook that had 2 Arnold Palmer courses just for development pressure. So pushing back on that is one thing, another. I think the process of having it where it needs a better public hearing process is the biggest thing to focus on. Because the public spoke out with Governor Scott, they just didn't cover the sentence. That is to me, what you should be focusing on. That, because things change over time. Things may evolve, that other things may want to happen, but I would focus on the process of public hearing so people can speak.
Okay, so our lawyer has given us a recommendation. And if there's no objection, we could put this on the table or direct it to him to craft, so it could come back to us at our next meeting. Would that be satisfactory to y'all?
I'm just
I would
wondering
feel
if,
more comfortable with that.
wondering
Yeah.
if we need to be more timely. I'm wondering if we need to be more timely than waiting, how many months till December? I'm just wondering, I'm really worried about this whole thing and how fast it came out with no public access information. And I agree completely with the commissioner. That whole thing is just, we really need to know about these so that we can respond better. We were very fortunate to have a whistleblower help us with this time. But I'm just, I know that the Regional Planning Council will be meeting in the interim. And then, so if we wait until December, we're waiting for the Regional Planning Council, because our stuff is just a recommendation to them. And so that puts 2 meetings of the Planning Council before this would maybe be, done. So I'm just pointing that out.
Well, there's 2 things we could do. Let Dawn come up with a general resolution, which will not just be for this issue, but for several others. But secondly, we do have a legislative committee. The ABM does. And their charge is to work on issues that are a concern to us. And then we can take a position, recommend positions to the regional council that might be appropriate, whether it's this or other issues, which is even broader. I mean, Alana cited the one issue that's just whisked through without anybody even knowing about, and I imagine there are probably others. Our vice chair mentioned the concern that local governments have that the state legislature not take away the authority of local government or make switches or do anything else that's going to impact local government's authority.
Yeah, they know we don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you have that as a position, not of the city, but of the general.
Could I make a
Please.
possible suggestion? The Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council meets in October. And so perhaps, the resolution could be crafted and presented to the Regional Planning Council and in the matter of, we asked legal to come up with a resolution supporting the things we talked about here. Defining what a state park is, defining what type of public input before there's a significant change at the state park. And bring it to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. It can be sent out to our members here. And then if there's information that you think the vote was missed a little bit, get it to us and we'll present that to the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. I think that might be the best solution to keep it timely. I'll be at that meeting. I'll be the chairman of the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, so I can make sure that any comments are brought to the council, because ultimately it's the council's decision whether or not to pass a resolution. So that sounds okay.
Y'all feel comfortable with that?
Mayor,
I think that's an excellent solution as well.
we can host one of the committee meetings in between, and I'll invite all of you to attend so you can review that language before it's sent over. And I just want to remind everyone, we do have that executive steering committee. You guys do want to officially approve it before it goes over to the RPC. We can always convene that. We do need a chair for our legislative review committee. Just pointing that out. And then we'll also need 5 at-large members. We have not designated those yet. So if you're interested, please let me know. So that way we can convene that if you guys want to take that route of getting it approved by the ABCM before it goes to the full council for approval.
I'm hearing 2 things. I think we need to go by Woody's suggestion. But Alana, if you want to set up an executive committee to also look at the recommendations for comment and share them with the group, we can do that as well.
Well, at the very least, I'm thinking maybe the Natural Resources and Environmental Impact Review Committee can meet and you guys can all review the draft language. And then if we have a general consensus on it, then we'll send it over to the council. Does that work?
That'll happen before the October meeting. So our chair can be in your boss.
Yeah, as long as Anne's willing to change her
That
motion
sounds-
to kind of fit that.
Yes, please.
Okay, the motion's been changed. I hope somebody got wind of it and it's on the record. And if there's no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Can you receive the motion?
Okay. Don, would you mind stating it in language that would be appropriate? Because I've lost track.
Glad you're here.
As I understand the motion, the motion is to prepare a resolution that captures the discussion that we've had here this morning. And then that resolution can be circulated to members of this group for review and any comments this group would like to share with staff. But ultimately, that resolution will be finalized for presentation to the Regional Planning Council at its October meeting for action by the Regional Planning Council.
Okay.
And do you want any more details about the resolution itself? Because I took a few notes, so just generally, it will have language in support of the state parks and, you know, using management plans, the annual management plans as guidelines. And then,
10-year management plan.
okay.
Because the management plans are reviewed every 10 years. And as, you know, Mary said, she's participated in those, I participated. Many of you have helped write those management plans. They're very thoughtful.
And then potentially defining resource-based recreation, so providing some guidelines for that. Ensuring, you know, we have passive resource-based recreation. Using some of the economic valuation of Tampa Bay report that we wrote to help support these arguments. And maybe even also focusing on that process of the public hearing and strengthening that verbiage. Does that reflect what everyone's? Okay,
Sounds
awesome.
Alana, if I can make a comment. I would just encourage you to look at a couple of the statutes that I referenced. These are not exhaustive. There is, after the statement about compatible with conservation and protection of public lands, there actually is a definition of what's allowable, which has things like fishing, hunting, camping, but then it says and other related activities. So there is a definition in statute right now. I didn't put everything on these slides, but I think a review of a couple of these, there may be places to highlight.
Senator,
So maybe
thank you. This is the reason why we have Don Kahn here, who has been with us for 12 years. He is an extremely competent attorney and very confident he will check this out. But thank you for pointing that out. And thank you for your presentation. It means a lot to us. We will keep in touch with you.
Please do.
And now, Matt, please have a final vote on this resolution. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Abstained. And you will be hearing from Alana as to any special consideration of whatever Don comes up with, so that y'all can take a look at it. And we will then pass it on and ready for the meeting of the Regional Planning Council, which the chair will make sure. Okay. Thank you again, Representative. And now we're going to move on to what we call the roundtable discussions on current issues and initiatives. And why we do this is because each of you and each of the organizations that you represent is very important to us, not only as a collective, but also individually. So I'm going to go around the room real quickly and ask you if any of you have something you want to share with us, an idea where you think we can collaborate, share resources, or perhaps an event that you're taking off. Something that everyone needs to be aware of. So I'm going to start with Joseph, and we're going to, excuse me, honey, I didn't see you sitting over there. Yeah, I heard. Okay, Chris?
Yes, Chris
We'll
Bradley.
start with you, and then we'll go around the room, and we'll also give the people online an opportunity. You all take out your pencils, your pens or whatever, and jot notes if there's something that's coming up that's of interest to you. And Alana will also have it online as a summary. So Chris?
Hi, Chris Pratt with the Environmental Protection Commission in Hillsborough County. Just wanted to say that we've completed our annual benthic monitoring and seagrass monitoring for the season, so everything is moving forward of our own schedule. So
Chris?
Is that something that should be presented to the ABCM?
it can be once we have some results
Okay, will you let me know?
at a future date.
Thank you.
Okay, Joseph, you have something to share?
Joseph, Diane, City of St. Pete.
And Vicky, you have any plans you want to put out for a magazine?
Actually, I have some, I'm working and I've been working on a story on septic tanks. Because that was one of the ABCBM's priorities. And I keep running into kind of brick walls. And I finally found a septic tank installer in Hernando County, in Dane City, so I'm not sure which county is that. Who's really good. He worked for Swift Mud. He's a soil hydrologist. And he's concerned that all of these new regulations aren't really going to be very effective. But the law is by July, if you install a septic tank in a BMAP on a less than an acre, you have to have this new septic, this new technology. And everybody with a septic tank has to have it by 2030. But I'm kind of confused on where I should go. I mean, septic tanks are a key issue. But I keep running into dead walls in terms of, yeah, who do I talk to write this story?
Okay, well, if anybody has any input, they can share, let Lana know, and she'll let you know. Think about it, that's a very important issue. Okay, anything else?
Just fun stuff, but thank you.
Ann?
So I just want to say the fall is very busy with activities. So if I could just briefly run through some, is that all right? Barbara? Okay, so I would like to say the St. Petersburg Museum of Fine Arts is offering an exhibit on John James Audubon's prints, Birds of America. So you may want to take advantage of that while it's here. It's gonna open in October and run through into the winter. The Florida Birding and Nature Festival is gonna be in Apollo Beach, October 17 to 20. So definitely come to that if you can, sign up, field trips, so it's awesome. Audubon, Florida is having its statewide conference in Daytona Beach in early November. And the Florida Ornithological Society is having its meeting at the end of this month in Palatka. So those are things that if you're interested in that kind of stuff, definitely follow up to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. And getting those notes, they'll be on our site. Yes, do you have anything, Mark?
Real briefly, so most relevant to this group, the Army Corps of Engineers Jacksonville District has released their final environmental impact statement for the Tampa Deepening Project. That was on public notice for the past year or so. I'm in the process of reviewing that, and my takeaway today was Dr. Morawski's discussion about these chemicals of emerging concern, because a lot of some of the projects that are in that Tampa Deepening Project include beneficial use. So now I'm thinking that I might want to, we're going to be involved in the actual permitting and the construction of some of these beneficial use projects. I think these CECs, or chemicals of emerging concerns, should be considered in the placement of some of these materials.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Okay.
Phil Compton with Friends of Hillsborough River. Yeah, I'll remind you in December, but the 24th annual Holiday Boat Parade, which goes from Lowry Park up to Sulphur Springs, will happen on Sunday, the 22nd, not to be confused with the Friends of the Riverwalk event, which is downtown on Saturday, the 21st. Our parade is paddler friendly. It's the only one in Tampa Bay, where most of the participants actually paddle their own canoes or stand-up paddle boards or kayaks and what have you. So we'll remind you about that. It's a really fun event.
There's been a new development in the Pine Island, also known as Beer Can Island. Property, the owners have submitted a privately initiated plan amendment to establish a land use on the property called Island Recreation, which would, it's similar to what they had proposed some time ago, which would allow continued commercial activities on the island as
Question, Pine Island in Lee County or Pine Island?
this is an unincorporated Hillsborough County.
Okay, because there's two.
Bear
Yeah.
Can Island.
Okay.
So, so that application is going to be pending. I would imagine there's going to be a great deal of coordination with partner agencies, interested stakeholders on the proposal. So it'll probably play out through into 2025.
Would you let, I want to know any particulars as to public participation or input?
I will.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Amber with the district. So just want to update everyone. We did extend our water shortage order through December. And part of that was to help build up the reservoir, which we're happy to report it continues to increase. I think it's now to more than 12 billion gallons, which is really nice to see. We're thinking about 200 million gallons a day from the Hillsborough River. Hillsborough River remains very high. Whether or not we enact the Tampa bypass canal this weekend, if it gets to the action stage of 25 feet, we may, but we're trying to keep it, stop doing that, and then to continue to try to give Tampa Water as much water as they can. But if you can encourage your member governments and your constituents to continue to abide by the modified phase 1 order in Hillsborough, Pinellas, Pasco, and the cities as well. So you continue to follow up on watering restrictions and encourage conservation measures.
Oh, and just to let everyone know, Amber is our new representative on behalf of the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and she's taking the place of Chris Anastasia.
Nick, do you have anything?
Just that Tampa Electric has the Run for the Manatees Saturday, January 18th out at Apollo Beach. It usually sells out fast, which is why I'm bringing it up now and not later in the year. If you'd like to participate, all the proceeds go to the Florida Aquarium this year.
Okay. Be sure to get the details to Alana. Ed?
I've got a bunch, so indulge me for a second. So a couple of procurement announcements and opportunities to work with the SRA program. Coming up this Friday is the deadline to submit Bay mini grants proposals to the SRA program. That is a community-based program that's funded through the sales of our license plate. We usually fund projects up to about $5,000. So if you know a community-based organization that's doing good work in Tampa Bay, please direct them towards that opportunity. As was mentioned, Don Kahn's retiring from the RPC as legal counsel, but he's also been serving as long-term legal counsel for the SRA program as well. So we're actually currently advertising for letters of interest for legal counsel through September 20th. So if you know of any appropriate legal counsel through SRA programs, legal services, please direct them our way. We also have 2 procurement RFPs out on the street right now. Tampa Bay Regional Stormwater Controls Project is looking for professional engineering services to identify priority projects in Old Tampa Bay and then implement projects throughout the Tampa Bay watershed. This is in working in partnership with the Regional Planning Council. Those proposals are due September 25th. And then we also have another RFP out looking for support for behavior change services. This is working with Dr. Blake Simmons to refresh some of our social marketing campaigns, Be Floridian and Pipe Up campaigns, to really use informed social science and marketing strategies to revamp some of those behavior change campaigns that we've developed in the past. Those proposals would be due on November 8th. We also have National Estuaries Week coming up September 21st through 28th. There's a number of events throughout that week. One of those is partnering with Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. We actually have a Brews in the Bay event at Motorworks Brewery on September 24th. Come out, have a beer with the Estuary Program staff and talk about your favorite project with us. We also have the Tampa Bay Debris Derby, which is a cleanup event on October 5th. That's going to be based out of E.G. Simmons. And this is basically getting people out, cleaning up trash throughout Tampa Bay. And it's basically held as a fishing tournament. So the more trash you bring in, the heaviest weight that's weighed in, you're the winner of that Tampa Bay Marine Derby. And last but not least, I don't know if it's been brought up at all. If you all haven't heard, George Henderson, a longtime ABM member, actually worked for the estuary program for the short period, as well as a longtime employee at the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, just recently passed away. So if you know his family, please send your condolences to his family and friends. So that's all I have.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm very sorry to hear this.
Steve Myers, College of Marine Science, working with the estuary program, Mark Luther and MacDill Air Force Base. We've been monitoring wave environment off the shore of the base. We deployed our instruments and recovered them after about 6 weeks at sea. And initial findings are showing a very intense and potentially erosive waving field. And look for more mature results in the next few months.
Keith, do you have anything? Right, gotcha.
Just a little shout out, Niles County Public Works, has been chosen for the 2024 Florida Shore and Beach Preservation Association's Outstanding Service Award. And this is because of the response after Hurricane Idalia with the emergency sand dune restoration, after that erosion. Otherwise, we're in wet season and dealing with all of the fun responses and hopefully preventative activities.
Something you want to read?
So FDOT District 7, we have 2 project development studies coming up. For US 301, 2 State Road 674, big one. Big multiple for Veterans Expressway.
Be sure that, because I couldn't hear everything you said, to put that down in writing again for a lot of us. We do want to put all this on our meeting notes online. David, do you have something you want to share?
Yeah, we've got 2 things that are sort of like related. One of them is the impacts to Sarasota Bay from Tropical Storm Debbie. We had 10 to 15 inches of rain that came across associated with that storm. That is a second once in a century storm we've had in 2 years. Probably June 10th, where we had the highest rainfall amount, hourly rainfall amount on record in over 50 years. So August, we had 19 inches of rain, which is more than twice the average. It's the second wettest August in a data set that goes back to 1915. So we've had a lot of stresses. City of Bradenton's wastewater treatment plant basically is in a state of near collapse, to be honest. They went septic, which means no oxygen in the wastewater treatment system, which means the bacteria that are used for treating wastewater all died. Manatee County contributed a feedstock to restart it, but they died as well. The issue that we've got there is clogged filters, overflows that are moving closer to 100 million gallons. So the Manatee River is not safe right now. A lot of the look that we see down there is not really wastewater related, but I think Manatee County's release over the dam was about 18 billion gallons. So 3 times the capacity of that dam has been discharged. But we also had about 10 billion gallons of stormwater runoff came into our bay. The bottom of Sarasota Bay, south of the city of Sarasota down to Venice, has basically had no oxygen for a couple of weeks. So we're getting big fish kills down there. So it's not looking good. The bright spot that we have is we don't have any offshore red tide, and that rotates into the second thing we want to talk about, which is I think Vicky wrote up about the paper we did about Caloosahatchee River influence on duration of red tides. We got that published in Florida Scientist. It is a really neat kind of story. However, all the activity is going on with Everglades restoration, Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, based upon $2 billion spent by Army Corps, allows the length to be staged up higher. So we should see fewer damaging discharges from the Caloosahatchee River, which means we should have lesser intensity, smaller and shorter duration red tides. If we do that, and if we do the Everglades agricultural area reservoir, there should be some good things about how we feed red tide to make it bigger once it's initiated and transported. And then the last thing related to that is we did get our permits from DEP for what we call the Magic Jet Ski Study, which is using 1,000, 2,000 gallon per minute mobile platform for treating ozone. And we're going to be able to see whether or not it actually works within the open waters of Sarasota Bay next time we have red tide.
Well, you might want to put all that information together and share it with our editor. There, that would be an interesting article, and also perhaps you could update us at a future meeting. That's interesting, very. Yeah, no, we appreciate you being here.
Appreciate being here.
Okay, Dr. Mosky, thank you again for your presentation. Did you?
Sally Thompson, Tampa Bay Conservancy. I thought I had announced this before, but this is the first time I've been in person for a long time. I got lost getting here. But there's so much development with this. Anyway, I wanted to mention again that the Hillsborough County Greenways and Trails Master Plan has been approved by the county commission. That was approved in June, and it's an update from the original master plan from 1995, so 30 years coming. It connects with the Florida, and ways with the Florida Gulf Coast Trail as a whole initiative connecting the statewide greenways and trails, which connect with Pinellas County, the Florida Gulf Coast, and on down Charlotte County. And then also I manage the Florida Greenways and Trails Foundation Facebook page. Whatever news on greenways and trails you might want to know about, or wants to send me stuff.
Thank you. Mary, it's not about anything.
No, we had mentioned the birding festival, and that's our big thing coming up. And if any of you agencies would like to have a booth, we do still have some booths available at the expo Friday and Saturday. So if you want to have a table and share all your good news with people coming through. A bunch of our field trips are sold out, so we're anticipating a good turnout. And we have some fantastic speakers. If anyone is a photographer, Tim Lehman from National Geographic, he's a National Geographic explorer and photographer, wrote an absolutely fantastic photograph, an absolutely fantastic book on birds in paradise, that he's giving a photography workshop Friday morning. So if anybody's a photographer and wants some great advice.
And again, please don't forget to give these dates to Alana so we can publicize them. The gentleman next to you, I didn't get your name.
Mick, this is Mick McCarty, and he's with Tampa Audubon as well.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to run the Zoom for the meeting, so that session, if you can't attend in person, you can attend virtually by Zoom.
Okay,
And if
good.
you sign up, you can't attend the Zoom, it'll be recorded, you'll be able to access that.
Thank you. Kathleen, did you have anything?
Oh, yeah, I just want to echo what Amber said. We, for Tampa Bay Water, we really appreciated the district sending their 1 day a week watering. It was vital to us, kind of making it through the dry spring and our demand and staying in compliance with our permits. And it made about a 30 million gallon a day drop in demand compared to some of the months the year before. So for those of you, that can encourage and educate the population, that was very important to get to. And we are, but a difference a few months make, we went from being about 2 billion gallons in our reservoir to being 12.2 this morning. So the rains have really helped us. Our reservoirs, our savings account for the spring, and we are on track to filling it in the next month.
I want to echo Sean's comments, the Tampa Bay Pilots Association, we're watching the Pine Key development, and we've been involved with Hillsborough County zoning on that project. Our concerns are strictly public safety, expansion of an island right next to a major ship channel with larger and larger ships, recreational boaters, et cetera. So we've been in all of those discussions to date and will continue to do so. Thank you.
I'll have a meeting in Largo at noon, but I didn't have anything to say. I'm gonna be leaving shortly.
Pam, did you have something to bring up?
For Fish and Wildlife, so Michelle Hunter for Fish and Wildlife. We've been talking internally about Sulphur Springs and the potential for restoration. We noticed the pool closure, so if, not sure what the city would be doing with that, but if there's potential for expanding restoration into that property, we'd be interested in partnering or having sessions.
Let us know what comes out of this discussion. Jack, did you have anything you
I
want
got a
to?
few things. I'd like to thank Amber Smith and Swiftman for working so closely with us during this past storm. We kept the neighborhood that had flooded out twice already, but after Debbie, it didn't flood out again. The improvements we made saved that neighborhood, and it's been progress for like the past 10 years, especially. All these times you'd always see Pasco coming on the news for flooding here, flooding there. You haven't seen us on there at all. And because of the partnership we've had, it's been great. Ned, I want to thank you for listening about the baffle boxes years ago. You got to watch Indian River, how they struggled with their thing. And all the baffle boxes actually been in place. So Lake Saxon's coming forward. I guess we did have an algae bloom, which I learned. So thank you for that. It's a partnership that's taking place. And believe it or not, I want to thank Fish and Wildlife for helping our citizens get safe. With that toxin was coming out of that Ankle River. Not sure exactly what was causing it, but we had to shut down our scallop season, which they were so great in helping us get the extension right away. We could actually do a lot of promotion for it. We had a great event called the Scallop Festival, we've been running year in, year out. From here in, we didn't invite you guys to bring in a tent out there to kind of celebrate with us, but our season is now going to be all the way to the 24th, which we're excited about to finish out strong. So thanks for all the partnerships.
Okay, Brand, do you want to share anything? Go ahead, I'm sorry. No, Dawn. No. I'm just gonna roll under the table.
Alyssa Powers, Manatee County. I just wanted to shout out to EPC, who got to support monitoring this year, and staff. Really appreciated that. Thanks for letting us tag along on that. Well, with everything in the news, Manatee County received, yes, record rainfalls during Hurricane Debbie. We actually dealt 500-year rainfall event according to Swiftman. And so we're still assessing some damages, especially in our rural areas. So we're looking at the possibility of NRCS helping out with some of our farmer communities and some of those rural streams that really saw a lot of erosional deposition changes in their smaller corridors. So still working through what's happening there. And I encourage everybody to go see the natural resources calendar of events for the fall. Lots of activities are posted out there. Everyone is really enjoying the tram tours at Robinson Preserve. I think it's one of our more popular preserves and one of our popular activities. So if you're interested in that, then get online, register before they sell, or sorry, they're free before they fill up. That's all.
Thank you. Now, I know Dawn's not gonna say anything more, but I want to again, thank you for everything you've done today and helping us.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Madam Chair, I have no report, and I just have to tell you guys, being around for so long, it is absolutely wonderful to see such a robust ABMC again. And so thank you all for participating. Thank you, Alana, as our lead staff, and thank you, Ms. Vaughn.
Our new executive director, she has just inspired all of us to really reach for the best. And to me, I look forward to this meeting every single time. I mean, I mark it on my calendar. It's such a joy to hear from each of you. You're all so important to us. We have some online people that want to say anything.
So Liz Lindsay mentioned that today there is a Clean Water as Critical Climate Action, some a virtual event at 6 p.m. and she included the link there, so I can send it to you all if you're interested in joining. And then Justin Tramble included the link to register for the debris derby. And then I also wanted to say something on behalf of the RPC. We're interested in sort of gathering all of your stories about the accomplishments of the ABCM over time. And I think the passing of George Henderson reemphasizes the need to really chronicle everything that we've been able to accomplish with this group, because I know we still have some OG members like Sally and so if we can get some details on if there's a memorial of Slivers, I would love to share that with you all so we can attend if you're available. And I will be in contact if any of you guys are interested in like setting up a quick 30-minute call with me so I can get your stories for that timeline we want to create on our website that just sort of includes everything we've been able to do with the ABCM.
Okay,
And then Justin Tramble has his hand raised for online.
Justin?
Yeah, Justin Tramble, Tampa Bay Waterkeeper. Over the past month or so, with the SSOs and the amount of pollution notices that we've received, we had a unique opportunity to have a lot of messaging opportunities. So, a lot of media has been reaching out for our advocacy organizations thoughts, and I wanted to just extend an invite because we talk about infrastructure investments and the need to continue to prioritize infrastructure investments, but I think one of the pieces that's missing from our communication, and I want to fix that, is message that there's a lot of great work being done. So we're very vocal and loud when our perception of like the can keeps getting kicked down the road. But what I want to do is continue to be just as loud and vocal about when our municipal partners are picking up that can and investing in the wastewater infrastructure investments that we keep saying need to be happening. So I wanted to just extend an invite to anybody on here that would like to share with Tampa Bay Waterkeeper any projects that we can help champion to help push across the finish line. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to say, call me.
Thank you very much. Anybody else online that I need to recognize? Okay, thank you again, all of you, for taking the time in your busy schedules to participate. Your personal appearance here, either in person and also those online, deeply appreciate you. Y'all have a good couple of weeks, keep in touch. Don't forget to share any of your information again with Alana so we can put it on our website. This meeting is adjourned.
It will be.